For the first time in this class, we are coming to a civilization that you've probably dealt with on a regular basis in world history classes in middle school, high school, and we're all familiar with the ideas of ancient Egypt. Now, Egypt, when you think about it, is basically existing within a few miles of the Nile River, as well as the Nile Delta. And the Nile River, of course, runs the exact same direction every other river does. Not north or south, but rather down. And so it runs actually to the north. And that's a little bit confusing for a lot of people in the United States because we're used to the Missouri, the Mississippi, etc., all running generally south. But here we are running north. And the Nile is also known for flooding. That gives them very fertile soil along the banks of the Nile, which is why the civilization is so condensed into that highway. Now, they have this concept of the red land and the black land. The red land is the desert, the black land being the fertile soil that is flooded, or was until the Aswan High Dam, on a regular basis and allowed for farming. Most of the shores were lined with thick papyrus. So as we look at it, you have a society developing in an area where you can literally have 1 foot in the black land, 1 foot in the desert, and see that line. It creates a society that is very binary, black and white, good and bad. And it makes sense because the land literally is good and bad. There's literally a binary surrounding them at all times. Later, Egypt would become the granary for Rome because this land is so fertile. By the way, we have the same thing in the United States along the Missouri River. If you ever travel through Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, etc., along the river, anywhere between the bluffs is going to be some of the most fertile farmland that we have in the United States because that river continues to flood periodically, sufficiently to renew the soil as farmers grow their crops. And for the Egyptians, the Nile is the center of the universe. It's as if nothing else existed beyond the Nile. No other peoples developed. In the Old Kingdom, this leads to a very distrustful look at the outside world. Same with the Middle Kingdom. By the New Kingdom, they become a little more cosmopolitan, and we're going to see more acceptance, more trade, etc. going on. It's not that the Egyptians didn't trade. It's that they lacked trust in a lot of the people that they were working with because they weren't Egyptian. They weren't from the center of the cosmos as the Egyptians saw it. Now, let's talk about that cosmology or their understanding of their universe. When it comes to the dead, of course, we're all familiar with mummification. Sometimes it was dadification. Sometimes it was uncleification. But you get the idea. The mummification process was there to preserve the body of the dead. Pharaohs got 70 days in natron, which is a form of salt. It's actually closer to baking soda. It came from a dry lake bed in Libya, modern day Libya. Whereas your commoners might have gotten 2 days in salt. So there's a vast difference between the various classes when we deal with Egypt. The idea, though, is to preserve the body so that the soul has a home. They have a backup plan, too. We'll get to that. Now, to the Egyptians, before creation, the world was chaos. By the way, this is the same cosmology we see from numerous societies across the world today. Then a creator god, Atum, springs forth. And he pleasures himself, shall we say, creating Shu and Tefnut. They have children, giving birth to the earth god and the sky god, Geb and Nut, who give birth to Osiris, Isis, Septh, and Nephthys. Osiris represents the ordered world, civilization, and ruled Egypt. Seth is his antithesis. He is chaos. One way to look at this is modern Christian ideas of God and the devil, where the devil or Satan can be this force of chaos, this force of the unknown, this force of things beyond our control, whereas God represents oftentimes civilization, things that are organized, things that are considered good. Now, Osiris and Isis have a son by the name of Horus, who will displace Seth and go ahead and rule Egypt. Osiris will become the god of the underworld. There's a whole story there. I won't get into it here. Horus, for his part, is the pharaoh in life. So Horus represents or becomes the pharaoh. Well, really, the pharaoh becomes Horus. When the pharaoh dies, the pharaoh becomes Osiris. And we get this very us versus the other mentality in Egypt. Again, that very binary worldview due to the Nile. Now, we do have chronologies. You don't have to memorize the dates for this class. I did for an Egyptology class. That was very interesting. But the part you need to know is there is an early dynastic period before we get into really the pharaohs as we know them. And then we have the three kingdoms, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom, as well as what's called intermediate periods, which are basically periods of civil unrest, civil war, and they usually come to an end and lead to some other power coming into play. The Old Kingdom, very, very powerful. These kingdoms can be broken up based on their characteristics. So the Old Kingdom tends to have strong pharaohs, a strong social pyramid. Some trade with neighbors, and they are very, very polytheistic. By the Middle Kingdom, people are questioning the power of the pharaoh. So in the Old Kingdom, everyone has faith in the pharaoh. By the Middle Kingdom, people are kind of questioning that. We see a lot of independent cities. We almost see a breakdown to city-states. By the New Kingdom, what we have is a very wealthy empire with extensive trade, a great deal of art and architecture, and it will end with the invasion of the Sea Peoples around 1200 BCE. We don't know who the Sea Peoples are, and we'll be talking about them for the next couple of chapters because that date, 1200, is really important. That's the end of the Bronze Age, but also it's brought about by this invasion that sort of resets the entire Mediterranean as we know it. Now, there is going to be, during the pre-dynastic period, this period of unification. We're right around 3100 BCE, and what we're going to see is a series of unifications. It's really misleading to say that there's one. There's several, and then it breaks down, and then it develops again. But basically what we get is Narmer showing up, and he will unite Upper and Lower Egypt. This is always represented in Egyptian art by the use of the crown of Lower Egypt combined with the crown of Upper Egypt. So we get the bowling pin being inserted into that crown of Lower Egypt to create a crown that you see in the upper right, that represents unified Egypt, or Egypt as a whole. The initial capital is going to be at Memphis, but of course those capitals change from pharaoh to pharaoh, dynasty to dynasty.